We arrived late to Christmas dinner and overheard my daughter-in-law mocking my husband's burned scars. People lose their appetite seeing those horrible marks. Her father arrived right behind us. He turned pale. I know those scars, he whispered. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me tell you how 20 minutes of overhearing a conversation destroyed my family and revealed a secret that had been buried for 55 years. Traffic on Christmas Eve is a special kind of hell, and my husband James and I were stuck right in the middle of it. A jackknifed semi had turned Interstate 95 into a parking lot, and we'd been sitting there for 40 minutes while our son David's Christmas dinner got colder by the minute. We should call them, James said, drumming his scarred fingers on the steering wheel. Those burns covered his right hand and arm, traveling up to his neck and part of his face. 55 years since the fire that gave them to him, and they were still the first thing people noticed about my husband. I didn't mind them. I'd fallen in love with James Porter when we were both 17, 3 years after the accident that marked him. To me, those scars were proof that my husband was a hero, even if he never wanted to talk about how he got them. David knows we're stuck in traffic, I said, checking my phone. I texted him 20 minutes ago. James shifted in his seat, uncomfortable in the dress shirt I'd convinced him to wear. He hated formal dinners, hated being looked at, hated the way people's eyes would flicker to his scars and then quickly away, pretending they hadn't noticed. Our daughter-in-law, Ashley, had never been good at pretending. The traffic finally started moving at 6:30. We were supposed to have arrived at 5. David and Ashley's house in the suburbs was beautiful. All colonial architecture and manicured lawns, the kind of place that screams success. Our son had done well for himself as a corporate lawyer, married a beautiful woman, given us 2 grandchildren. But something had been off lately. David seemed tired whenever we visited, worn down, and Ashley had been making comments, little digs that she probably thought were jokes, about James' appearance, about his reluctance to take family photos, about how he always wore long sleeves even in summer. Maybe we should have brought wine, James said as we pulled into their driveway. I could hear the anxiety in his voice. He knew Ashley didn't like him, though he'd never said it out loud. We brought wine last time and she said we were predictable. I reminded him. We brought flowers the time before and she said they clashed with her color scheme. There's no winning with Ashley. We walked up to the front door and that's when I heard it. The window next to the door was cracked open, probably to let out cooking smells, and Ashley's voice carried clearly into the cold December air. I still can't believe you expect me to seat him at the head of the table. People lose their appetite seeing those horrible marks. He looks like something out of a horror movie. I felt James freeze beside me. My hand was on the doorbell but I couldn't press it. Couldn't move. Ashley, that's my father. David's voice. Tired, defeated. We've been through this. And I've been through 12 years of Christmas dinners trying not to stare. Your mother is bad enough with her church volunteer stories, but at least she's presentable. I invited my parents this year, David. What are they supposed to think when they see him? Maybe they'll think he's a human being who got hurt in an accident, David said. But there was no fight in his voice. We've talked about this. No, you talked. I sat there and took it because that's what I always do. Well, not tonight. Tonight I'm saying what I really think. Your father gives me the creeps, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise. The sound of a car pulling up behind us made us both turn. A silver Mercedes, expensive and gleaming. An older couple got out. The man tall and distinguished with silver hair. The woman elegant in a red dress. Ashley's parents. I'd never met them before. In 12 years of marriage, Ashley had always said they were too busy to attend family functions, always traveling or committed to something else. The man stopped when he saw us, his eyes going to James. And then something strange happened. All the color drained from his face. He grabbed his wife's arm so hard she gasped. Robert, what's wrong? She asked. But Robert Mitchell wasn't looking at her. He was staring at James' scars, at the pattern of burned tissue that traveled from his hand up his arm. His mouth open, closed, opened again. I know those scars, he whispered. Dear God, I know those scars. The words hung in the frozen air between us. Robert Mitchell's eyes locked on my husband's face. His wife, Patricia, looked between them, confused and increasingly alarmed. Robert, what are you talking about? she demanded. How could you possibly know this man? Before anyone could answer, the front door swung open. Ashley stood there, her face flushed from cooking. A perfect hostess smile plastered across her face. That smile died the instant she saw all of us standing there in her driveway, a tableau of confusion and shock. Mom, Dad, you're early, she said, then noticed James and me. Oh, Helen. James, you're finally here. The emphasis on finally wasn't lost on me. Neither was the way her eyes flickered to the open window, calculating whether we might have heard anything. The guilt that flashed across her face told me everything I needed to know. Are you going to invite us in? Or should we conduct Christmas dinner in the driveway? I asked sweetly. Years of dealing with difficult people at my hospital job had taught me how to maintain a smile while wanting to strangle someone. Ashley stepped back, flustered. Of course. Come in, everyone. Robert Mitchell hadn't moved. He was still staring at James, who had gone very still beside me. I knew that stillness. It was how James reacted when he was overwhelmed, when he wanted to run, but was forcing himself to stay put. Robert, are you coming? Patricia asked, her voice sharp with concern. He shook himself like a man coming out of a trance. Yes, sorry. I thought I recognized something. But his eyes kept returning to James as we all filed into the house. David appeared from the kitchen wearing an apron that said Grill Master that Ashley had probably bought him. Our son looked exhausted, the kind of tired that comes from more than just a long day at work. When he saw his father, his face brightened genuinely for the first time. Dad, Mom, I'm so glad you made it. He hugged us both, and I felt him hold on to James a little longer than usual. Traffic was awful. Right. Complete nightmare, James confirmed. His voice steady despite what we just heard. Sorry we're late. Ashley was making introductions, her voice bright and fake. David, these are my parents, Robert and Patricia Mitchell. Mom, Dad, this is David's father, James, and his mother, Helen. We've heard so much about you, Patricia said graciously, extending her hand. She was clearly the social one in the relationship. Ashley talks about David's family constantly. I just bet she does, I thought, shaking her hand. All good things, I hope. Robert finally stepped forward, still looking shaken. He extended his hand to James, and I watched my husband hesitate before taking it. The moment their hands connected, Robert's grip tightened. Where did you get those scars? He asked abruptly. Patricia gasped at his rudeness and Ashley's face went pale. Dad, that's not appropriate, she said quickly. Let's all go sit down. Dinner's almost ready. But Robert wasn't letting go of James' hand. Please, I need to know. Where did you get them? James's jaw tightened. I knew he was about to pull away, to retreat into himself the way he always did when people asked about the scars. But something in Robert's face stopped him. The older man wasn't asking out of morbid curiosity. He was asking like his life depended on the answer. A fire, James said quietly. I was 15. It was a long time ago. Where? Robert pressed. What kind of fire? Dad, seriously, Ashley interjected, her voice rising. This is completely inappropriate. Ashley, stop. Robert's voice cracked like a whip. I'd never heard him speak before, but clearly this was a man used to being obeyed. He turned back to James. Was it an apartment building in Philadelphia? August 1970. The room went utterly silent. Even the Christmas music playing softly in the background seemed to fade away. James's face had gone white. How did you know that? He whispered. Robert's eyes filled with tears. Because I was there. You pulled me out. You saved my life. If someone had told me that Christmas dinner would end with my daughter-in-law in tears, my son looking like he'd been hit by a truck, and a 73-year-old man crying into his wine glass, I would have told them they were crazy. But there we were. After Robert's revelation, Ashley had tried to salvage the dinner. She'd ushered everyone to the dining room, served the food with shaking hands, and attempted to make normal conversation, but normal had left the building the moment Robert Mitchell recognized my husband's scars. The children, Emma and Tyler, sat at the kids' table in the kitchen, blissfully unaware of the tension. Their voices and laughter felt like they were coming from another world. A simpler one, where Christmas dinner didn't involve life-altering revelations. Robert couldn't stop looking at James. Patricia had given up trying to understand what was happening, and was simply watching her husband with growing concern. David kept glancing between his father and his father-in-law, clearly trying to process the impossible connection. And Ashley. Ashley looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. I need to know the whole story, Robert said finally, pushing away his untouched plate. I've spent 55 years wondering who pulled me out of that building. I never saw your face clearly. There was too much smoke, too much chaos. The police couldn't identify you because you left before the ambulances arrived. James's fork clattered against his plate. I left because I was scared. I was 15 years old, and my parents had told me never to draw attention to myself. We were poor, living in the worst part of Philadelphia. My father always said that poor kids who played hero ended up blamed for whatever went wrong. So you saved someone's life and then just ran away? Patricia asked not unkindly. She seemed to be grasping the magnitude of what had happened. I went to the hospital later, James said quietly. I wanted to make sure to check if anyone had died. The nurse told me everyone made it out. That was enough for me. Everyone made it out because of you, Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. I was 18, living in that building with 5 other college students. We'd been drinking, celebrating the end of summer. Someone knocked over a candle and the whole place went up like a tinder box. I was on the 3rd floor, trapped in my room. The hallway was nothing but flames. He paused, wiping his eyes with his napkin. Patricia reached over and squeezed his hand. I'd given up, Robert continued. I was lying on the floor by the window, trying to breathe through my shirt, waiting to die. And then this kid appeared out of nowhere, coming through the fire like it was nothing. You grabbed me, threw me over your shoulder, and carried me down a back staircase I didn't even know existed. James was staring at his plate, his jaw clenched. I knew he hated talking about this, hated being the center of attention. The stairs collapsed, James said finally. Right after we got to the bottom, that's when I got burned. When the ceiling came down, I dropped you, pushed you out the back door and ran. I could hear sirens coming and I just ran. I tried to find you, Robert said. For years I tried. I hired investigators, put out ads in newspapers, even went on local television once. But I had no name, no face, just the memory of a teenage kid who saved my life and then vanished. Ashley stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need to check on the pie, she said, her voice too high, too tight. But David was looking at her with an expression I'd never seen before. Something between realization and betrayal. You knew, he said softly. Somehow you knew about this. Ashley froze halfway to the kitchen. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. David continued, standing up himself. Your father just told us he's been looking for the person who saved him for 55 years. And somehow after 12 years of marriage, after 12 years of you making comments about Dad's scars, of you finding excuses to keep your parents away from family events, suddenly they show up on Christmas Eve. That's ridiculous, Ashley said. But she wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. It's just a coincidence. Is it? I asked quietly. All eyes turned to me. Because it seems awfully convenient that after 12 years of your parents being too busy, too unavailable, always traveling or committed to something else, they suddenly appear tonight. The same night you were complaining about James's appearance, complaining loudly enough for us to hear through an open window. Ashley's face flushed bright red. You were eavesdropping. The window was open, James said. And there was a hardness in his voice I rarely heard. We heard everything you said about me. About how I look like something out of a horror movie. About how people lose their appetite looking at my scars. Patricia Mitchell gasped. Ashley Marie, you did not say that. But Ashley's expression had shifted from embarrassed to defensive. You don't know what it's been like. 12 years of explaining, of watching people stare, of having to warn friends before they meet him so they don't react badly. So instead of being grateful that your husband's father is a good man who happens to have scars from saving someone's life, you decided he was an embarrassment. I said the anger I'd been holding back since overhearing her comments was starting to crack through. You made him feel unwelcome in your home. You made your own husband choose between you and his father. I never asked David to choose, Ashley protested. Didn't you? David's voice was cold. Every time we planned a family event, you had a reason Dad shouldn't come. Too many people, bad timing, uncomfortable seating. I see it now. You've been pushing him away for years. Because it's exhausting, Ashley shouted. The mask had finally come off completely. It's exhausting being married to you, David. Your mother with her saint act. Always volunteering, always perfect. Your father with his scars and his silence making everyone uncomfortable. And you always defending them, always putting them first. They're my parents, David said quietly. And I'm your wife, Ashley shot back. When are you going to choose me? The silence that followed was deafening. Robert Mitchell stood up, his face a mask of disappointment. We're leaving, he said to Patricia. I won't sit here and listen to my daughter speak about the man who saved my life this way. Dad, wait, Ashley started. But Robert held up his hand. You knew, he said, and his voice was full of pain. Somehow you knew about the fire, about what happened, and you kept it from me. For how long, Ashley? How long have you known? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The guilt was written all over her face. Robert turned to James, who had stood up as well. I'd very much like to talk to you more. If that's all right, to thank you properly, to hear the whole story, but not here. Not tonight. James nodded silently. Robert pulled out a business card and pressed it into James's hand. Please, he said simply. Then he and Patricia left, walking out into the cold Christmas night, leaving behind a dinner table full of cold food and broken illusions. But that wasn't even the most surprising part of the evening. The week after Christmas was always quiet at the hospital where I worked as a volunteer coordinator. Most people were home recovering from holiday meals and family drama. I could relate to both. James had been quiet since that disastrous dinner. Not his usual comfortable quiet, but something deeper. He'd locked himself in his workshop in the garage, spending hours building a bookshelf that nobody had asked for and we didn't need. David had called twice, apologizing for Ashley's behavior, making excuses I didn't want to hear. I'd listened because he was my son, but my patience for defending the indefensible had worn thin somewhere around excuse number 5. What I didn't tell David was that I'd done something I wasn't particularly proud of. I'd called Patricia Mitchell. The conversation was awkward at first. Two women who'd met exactly once under the worst possible circumstances, trying to navigate a situation neither of us had signed up for. But Patricia was gracious, and after the initial uncomfortable pleasantries, we'd actually started talking. I need to understand something, I'd said finally. How did Ashley know about the fire? About James. Patricia had been quiet for a long moment. I'm not entirely sure, but I have a theory. She'd explained that 3 years ago, Ashley had become obsessed with genealogy. She'd started researching family history, interviewing relatives, compiling information. Robert had mentioned the fire during one of those interviews, talking about how it had changed the trajectory of his life, how the young man who'd saved him was his ghost, the hero he could never find. Robert became very successful because of what happened that night. Patricia had told me he'd been a mediocre student, partying too much, wasting his parents' money. The fire made him realize how precious life was. He went on to build a very successful investment firm. He spent decades doing charitable work, funding fire safety programs, helping burn victims, all because of what your husband did. And Ashley knew this. I think she figured it out somehow. Robert described the burns, their pattern, and she'd seen James' scars. She must have put it together, and instead of telling her father, she kept it secret, I said, the pieces falling into place, because she knew her father would want to meet James, would want to thank him, and she'd spent years convincing David to keep his father at a distance. I'm so sorry, Patricia had said. If I'd known, if Robert had known, we would have come forward years ago. Now sitting in my office at the hospital, I couldn't stop thinking about Ashley's choice. She'd known that her father had been searching for James for 55 years. She'd known how much it would mean to Robert to finally express his gratitude. And she'd kept silent because her vanity, her embarrassment over James' appearance, mattered more than her father's peace of mind. My phone buzzed. A text from David. Can we talk? Not about the dinner. Something else. Something I found. I called him immediately. What's wrong? I've been going through Ashley's things, David said, and he sounded wrecked. Not snooping exactly. She asked me to find her passport for a work trip, but I found something else. A folder labeled Robert's hero. My blood ran cold. What was in it? Everything, Mom. Newspaper articles about the fire. Hospital records. Robert's interview notes from when he was trying to find Dad. There's even a private investigator's report from 2 years ago. She paid someone to confirm that Dad was the person from the fire. 2 years. Ashley had known for 2 years and kept silent. David, I said carefully. What are you going to do? He let out a long breath. I don't know. I thought I knew my wife. I thought despite everything, despite her faults, she loved me. That we were a team. But this is something else entirely. Have you confronted her? Not yet. She's been staying at her sister's house since Christmas. Says she needs space to think. I gave it to her because I thought maybe we were both overreacting. Maybe it was just holiday stress. But this folder. Mom, this changes everything. We talked for a few more minutes before David had to go to a meeting. I sat in my office staring at the wall trying to process everything. My phone rang again. Robert Mitchell. Helen, I hope it's all right that I'm calling. Patricia gave me your number. Of course, I said. How are you? Confused, angry, grateful. He paused. I need to see James again to talk properly. I know Christmas dinner was a disaster, but I've waited 55 years for this. I can't let my daughter's terrible behavior rob me of the chance to know the man who saved my life. I'll talk to James. Promised. He's been processing everything. It's a lot for him. I understand. But Helen, there's something else you should know. Robert's voice dropped. I did some investigating after Christmas. I have resources, contacts. I wanted to understand why Ashley kept this secret. And did you find anything? Yes, he said grimly. And you're not going to like it. The coffee shop Robert Mitchell had chosen for our meeting was quiet, upscale, the kind of place where conversations were private, and the coffee cost more than it should. James had initially refused to come, but I'd finally convinced him by pointing out that the man deserved closure after 55 years. Robert was already there when we arrived, sitting in a corner booth with 2 thick folders in front of him. He stood when he saw us, and for a moment the 2 men just looked at each other. Then Robert extended his hand and this time James took it without hesitation. Thank you for coming, Robert said. I know this is all very strange. That's one word for it, James replied. But there was no hostility in his voice, just weariness. We ordered coffee and for a few minutes we made small talk. The weather, the traffic, anything to avoid the elephant in the room. Finally, Robert pushed one of the folders toward us. I need to show you something, he said. I hired a private investigator after Christmas, not to look into you, James, into Ashley. James and I exchanged glances. Why? I asked. Because I needed to understand why my daughter would keep something this important from me. Why she'd let me spend years searching for someone when she knew exactly where he was. Robert's jaw tightened. What I found is worse than I imagined. He opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, text messages, bank statements. The documentation was extensive and damning. Ashley knew about James 2 years ago, Robert began. She hired a private investigator to confirm his identity after I mentioned the fire during one of her genealogy interviews. The investigator found James relatively easily. There aren't that many men in their 70s with that specific pattern of burn scars in this area. So she's known for 2 years, James said quietly. And never told you. That's not all. Robert pulled out a series of emails. These are between Ashley and a family therapist. She'd been going to counseling, not couples therapy with David, but individual sessions. She told the therapist about the situation, about knowing her father was looking for James, about her embarrassment over James' scars. I started reading the printed emails. My hands began to shake. In them, Ashley described a plan, a deliberate, calculated plan to separate David from his parents. She'd written about how she needed to phase out her in-laws, especially James, because their presence made her uncomfortable. She'd strategized about how to create distance, how to make David choose between his wife and his father without making it obvious. This email is from 18 months ago, Robert said, pointing to one near the bottom of the stack. She's discussing how to handle the situation if I ever found James on my own. Her plan was to claim coincidence, to act surprised, and to then use the situation to finally convince David to cut contact with his father completely. How would that work? James asked, his voice hollow. She believed that if I met you and wanted to form a relationship, it would create awkwardness and pressure. She could use that pressure to convince David that it was too complicated, too weird, that it would be better for everyone if your family just backed away. Robert's face was gray with shame. My daughter planned to use my gratitude as a weapon to isolate your son from you. I felt sick. This wasn't just family drama or a daughter-in-law with boundary issues. This was calculated psychological manipulation. There's more, Robert said, and his voice broke slightly. These bank statements show that Ashley withdrew $15,000 from our family trust 2 years ago. The stated purpose was home renovations, but David told me they didn't do any renovations that year. Then what was the money for? I asked, though I had a terrible feeling I already knew. I believe she paid the private investigator much more than the initial fee to keep quiet, to not only find James, but to ensure the information never reached me. She bought his silence. James had gone very still beside me. Why would she go to such lengths? Robert met his eyes. Because you embarrass her. Because in her shallow, image-obsessed world, having a father-in-law with visible scars is a liability. And because she knew that if I ever met you, I'd want you in my life. I'd want to honor you, to include you in family events, to make up for 55 years of misgratitude, and that would make you impossible to hide. The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too warm. I needed air, but I couldn't move. I'm sorry, Robert said, and he was crying now, tears rolling down his distinguished face. I'm sorry my daughter is the person who would do this. I'm sorry that my gratitude, my search, somehow became ammunition she could use against your family. James reached across the table and did something I never expected. He put his scarred hand over Robert's. It's not your fault, James said quietly. You couldn't have known. But I should have, Robert insisted. I should have seen what kind of person she was becoming. Patricia tried to tell me that Ashley was too focused on appearances, too concerned with image over substance. I thought she was being too hard on our daughter. I was wrong. We sat in silence for a moment. Then James asked the question I'd been afraid to voice. What are you going to do with this information? Robert wiped his eyes. That depends on what you want. These documents prove that Ashley deliberately kept us apart. They prove she's been manipulating David for years. With your permission, I'd like to share them with my son-in-law. He deserves to know the truth about the woman he married. James looked at me. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He was a kind man, a private man, someone who avoided confrontation whenever possible. But he was also a father, and his son had been caught in Ashley's web for 12 years. Do it, I said, making the decision for both of us. David needs to know everything. But what we didn't know then was that Ashley had one more card to play, and it was going to tear our family apart even further. David called at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, 3 weeks after our meeting with Robert. James was already asleep, but I was up reading, unable to settle my mind. The phone's ringing made me jump. Mom. His voice was rough, like he'd been crying. I need you to come over now, please. What's wrong? Are the kids okay? The kids are fine. They're at Ashley's sister's house. It's Ashley. Just please come. I can't do this alone. James was awake by then, sitting up in bed with concern written across his face. I told him briefly what David had said, and we both got dressed in record time, driving through the empty streets to David's house with my heart pounding. David met us at the door. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were red and swollen, his hair uncombed. The house behind him was dark except for one light in the kitchen. I confronted her, he said without preamble. Robert gave me all the documents. I waited until the kids were gone, until we were alone. I showed her everything, and James prompted gently. David laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. She admitted it, all of it, the private investigator, the money, the plan to separate me from you. She said she did it because she loves me, because she wanted us to have our own life free from the complications of my family. David, I started, but he held up his hand. That's not why I called you here. Come inside. There's something you need to see. We followed him through the dark house to his home office. The computer was on, the screen showing what looked like a video chat program. David sat down, gestured for us to take the other chairs, and clicked play on a saved video. Ashley's face filled the screen. She was sitting in what looked like a hotel room, her makeup perfect, her expression calm. But there was something in her eyes that I'd never seen before, something cold. Since you won't answer my calls, David, I'm sending this, her recorded voice said. I know Robert showed you his little investigation. I know you think you understand what happened, but you don't. Not really. The video. Ashley took a sip of wine, completely composed. Yes, I kept the information about your father from my dad. Yes, I paid the investigator to stay quiet. And yes, I've been working for years to create distance between you and your parents. But I had good reasons. Good reasons. James repeated quietly, his voice thick with disbelief. On screen, Ashley continued. Your mother is a manipulative woman who uses her volunteer work and her sweetness to control everyone around her. Your father is damaged goods, David. Physically, emotionally, psychologically damaged. And I didn't want that damage touching our children. I felt James flinch beside me. David's jaw was clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grinding. I knew if my father met James, it would become this whole thing. Video. Ashley went on. The hero worship, the gratitude, the constant family dinners where we'd all have to pretend those scars aren't horrifying to look at. I protected our family from that. I protected our children from having to explain to their friends why their grandfather looks like he crawled out of a fire. He literally did crawl out of a fire, I said. My voice shaking with rage, saving her father's life. There's more, David said flatly. He fast-forwarded the video. Ashley's face reappeared. And if you think this is going to end with you choosing them over me, you're wrong because I have something you need to see. She held up a manila folder. Oh, do you remember when your dad supposedly gave up drinking 45 years ago? When he told everyone he'd quit, that he'd gotten sober. That he'd turned his life around? James went rigid beside me. David, turn it off. Dad, she's lying. Whatever she's about to say, she's lying. But Ashley was still talking on the screen. I found medical records, hospital admissions. Your father wasn't just drinking 45 years ago. He was hospitalized 3 times for alcohol poisoning. And Helen covered it up. She lied to you. Told you he had the flu. That he was working late. Anything to hide the truth. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was true. All of it was true. 45 years ago, James had hit rock bottom with his drinking. It had been the darkest period of our marriage. Months of hospital visits and lies and desperate prayers that he'd survive. But he had survived. He'd gotten sober. He'd stayed sober for 45 years. Mom, David's voice was small. Is it true? Yes, I said. Because I couldn't lie. Not anymore. But he got help. He's been sober for 45 years, David. That was a lifetime ago. On screen, Ashley smiled. A cruel, triumphant smile. So you see, David, your parents aren't the saints you think they are. Your father is a drunk and your mother is a liar. And if you choose them over me, if you let Robert's misplaced hero worship destroy our marriage, I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth. Everyone. The video ended. The 3 of us sat in silence. The only sound the soft hum of the computer. I got sober before you were born, James finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I never wanted you to know about that time in my life. I was ashamed. David turned to look at his father, and I saw tears in his eyes. Dad, I don't care that you struggled with alcohol 45 years ago. I care that you overcame it. I care that you've been an amazing father my entire life. I care that Mom loved you enough to stand by you during your darkest time. Ashley is threatening to tell Emma and Tyler, I said, understanding hitting me like a physical blow. She's going to tell your children that their grandfather is a recovered alcoholic. She's going to use it to poison them against him. She already has, David said bitterly. I found messages on her phone. She's been telling Emma that Grandpa James is sick, that he has a disease that makes him dangerous. Emma asked me yesterday if Grandpa was going to hurt us. James made a sound like he'd been punched. My hand found his holding tight. What are you going to do? I asked David. Our son looked at us. And in that moment I saw him make a choice. The choice Ashley had been so sure he wouldn't make. I'm divorcing her, he said simply. I've already talked to a lawyer. I'm filing on Monday, and I'm going to fight for full custody of the kids because I will not let her turn Emma and Tyler against their grandparents with lies and manipulation. David, divorce is a big step, James said carefully. Maybe counseling might help. Dad, she threatened to destroy you publicly to get what she wants. She's been systematically isolating me from you for years. She kept information from her own father that could have brought him peace just because she was embarrassed by your scars. David's voice was steel. This isn't a marriage worth saving. This is a cage I need to escape from. I should have felt triumphant. I should have been glad that my son was finally seeing Ashley for who she really was. But all I felt was sad. Sad that it had come to this. Sad that my grandchildren were going to go through their parents' divorce. Sad that Ashley's vanity and cruelty had poisoned something that should have been beautiful. Well, support whatever you decide, I told David. No matter what, I know, he said. That's the difference between you and her. You've always supported me even when it was hard. Even when I probably didn't deserve it. Ashley only supports me when I do exactly what she wants. We stayed for another hour talking through logistics and next steps. When James and I finally left, the sky was starting to lighten with the first hints of dawn. In the car, James was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. I'm sorry you had to cover for me 45 years ago. I'm sorry I put you in that position. You were sick, I said firmly. Addiction is an illness. You got treatment. You've been sober for 45 years. You have nothing to apologize for. Ashley's going to tell everyone, the kids, the neighbors, maybe even the press if she's angry enough. Let her, I said, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. Let her tell the world that you struggled with alcohol addiction in your 20s and overcame it. Let her tell everyone that I stood by my husband during his darkest hour. I'm not ashamed of our story, James. I'm proud of it. I'm proud of you. He was crying then, quiet tears running down his scarred face. I pulled over into an empty parking lot and held him while he cried. This man who had saved a stranger from a burning building, who had overcome addiction, who had survived 55 years of people staring at his scars and still remained kind. But we both knew the battle with Ashley was far from over. And we had no idea just how low she was willing to go. The divorce papers were served on a Tuesday morning. Ashley's response came that same afternoon in the form of a Facebook post that went viral within hours. I was at the hospital when my phone started blowing up with notifications. Text messages, missed calls, emails from people I barely knew. I ignored them until my supervisor, Margaret, came to find me, her face grave. Helen, you need to see this, she said, handing me her phone. Ashley's post was a masterpiece of manipulation. She'd written a long emotional essay about how she'd tried to protect her children from their grandfather's troubling history, only to have her husband turn on her. She portrayed herself as a concerned mother standing up against a family that enabled addiction and covered up the truth. She'd even included photos of James carefully chosen to emphasize his scars with captions about how trauma affects whole families. But the worst part was the comments. Hundreds of them from people who didn't know us, didn't know the real story. People calling James a monster, calling me an enabler, saying that David was wrong to choose his parents over his wife. Some even suggested that Child Protective Services should get involved, that Emma and Tyler weren't safe around their grandfather. I felt like I was going to be sick. The hospital board is going to see this, Margaret said gently. They're going to have questions about your judgment, about why you kept your husband's history private. It was 45 years ago, I said, my voice shaking. He's been sober longer than some of these commenters have been alive. I know, but perception matters, especially in a hospital setting, especially when it goes viral. She squeezed my shoulder. I'm on your side, Helen, but you need to be prepared for this to get worse before it gets better. She was right. By that evening, the post had been shared thousands of times. A local news station had picked it up, running a segment on family dysfunction that featured Ashley's post prominently. They'd even sent a reporter to our house, though James had refused to answer the door. David was beside himself when he called that night. I'm getting calls from everyone, my boss, my colleagues, clients. Ashley's post is making me look like I'm choosing an alcoholic parent over my children's safety. Have you talked to your lawyer? James asked. He was sitting very still on the couch, his face expressionless. I knew that look. He was shutting down, withdrawing into himself the way he always did when the attention became too much. Yes. She says Ashley's post could actually help our case. It shows she's willing to publicly humiliate the family to get what she wants, but in the short term it's going to be brutal. Brutal was an understatement. Over the next few days, I had to take a leave of absence from the hospital while the board investigated the situation. James stopped going to his woodworking club because some of the members had seen the post and the atmosphere had become awkward. We couldn't go to the grocery store without people staring and whispering. And then Robert Mitchell called. I'm holding a press conference tomorrow, he said without preamble. I'm going to tell the truth about what happened 55 years ago, About James saving my life, about Ashley's manipulation, about everything. Robert, you don't have to do that, I protested. This isn't your fight. Yes, it is. James saved my life. He gave me 55 more years that I wouldn't have had. Years that I used to build a company, raise a daughter who turned out to be cruel, and search for a hero who was there all along. The least I can do is stand up for him now. Ashley is your daughter, James said quietly. This will damage your relationship with her permanently. My daughter damaged our relationship the moment she chose vanity over integrity, Robert said. And there was steel in his voice. I'm ashamed of what she's become. And I won't let her destroy a good man's reputation to save her own ego. The press conference was held at Robert's company headquarters, a gleaming tower in downtown Philadelphia. He'd invited every major news outlet in the region, and the room was packed with reporters and cameras. James, David, and I sat in the front row. I held James' hand so tightly my knuckles were white. Robert stood at the podium, looking every inch the successful businessman he was. Patricia sat behind him, her face composed but her eyes sad. Thank you all for coming, Robert began. I'm going to tell you a story about a 15-year-old boy who saved my life, and the woman who tried to bury that truth for her own selfish reasons. For the next 20 minutes, Robert laid everything out. The fire, James's heroism, his 55-year search. He showed documents, photographs, medical records from his hospitalization after the fire. He explained how Ashley had discovered James' identity and kept it secret. He shared the private investigator's report, the emails detailing her manipulation of David, and then he addressed James' addiction. My daughter has attempted to paint James Porter as an unfit grandfather because he struggled with alcohol addiction 45 years ago, Robert said, his voice ringing through the room. Let me be clear. James Porter got sober before his son was born and has maintained that sobriety for 45 years. He got help. He overcame his illness. That is not a mark of shame. That is a mark of strength. The reporters were frantically taking notes. Cameras were flashing. I could see some of them looking at James, their expressions shifting from curiosity to respect. My daughter is not a victim, Robert continued. She is a manipulator who used her own father's trauma as leverage in a petty crusade against a man whose only crime was being scarred by the fire that saved my life. She has publicly humiliated a hero, and I will not stand for it. He paused, looking directly at the cameras. James Porter, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry it took 55 years to thank you. I'm sorry my daughter made you regret saving my life. And I'm sorry that your reward for being a hero has been cruelty and judgment from people who don't know your story. When the press conference ended, the reporters mobbed us. They wanted interviews with James, wanted the hero's perspective. But James simply shook his head, squeezed Robert's hand in thanks, and walked out with his head high. The narrative changed overnight. Ashley's Facebook post was now seen as manipulative rather than brave. People who had commented in support of her were deleting their comments, embarrassed. The news segment about family dysfunction was replaced with features about unsung heroes and overcoming addiction. But the battle wasn't over yet because Ashley had one last weapon to use, and it was the most dangerous one of all. The call came from David's lawyer on a Friday afternoon. Her voice was tight with controlled anger. Ashley has filed a motion for emergency custody of the children. She's claiming that James poses a danger to Emma and Tyler based on his history of addiction and what she's calling unstable behavior patterns. That's insane, David said. We were all on speakerphone in our kitchen. James's face growing paler by the second. My father hasn't had a drink in 45 years. He's never been anything but loving with the kids. I know, but she's found a psychologist willing to testify that children of alcoholics can relapse under stress, and that the recent media attention constitutes stress. She's arguing that James should have no contact with Emma and Tyler until he undergoes a psychological evaluation. Can she do that? I asked, my voice sharp. She can try. The hearing is Monday. We'll need character witnesses, documentation of James' sobriety, maybe a statement from his AA sponsor if he has one. James stood up abruptly and walked out of the kitchen. I heard the back door open and close. I'll get you everything you need, David promised the lawyer. After he hung up, he looked at me with devastated eyes. Mom, I'm so sorry. I never thought she'd go this far. She's desperate, I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. Robert's press conference turned public opinion against her. This is her last play. I found James in the backyard, sitting on the bench we'd placed under the old oak tree. He was staring at his hands, those scarred, capable hands that had saved a life and built a family and never raised in anger. She's going to win, he said flatly. Some judge is going to look at me, look at my record, and decide I'm too dangerous to be around my own grandchildren. No, I said firmly, sitting beside him. That's not going to happen. We have 45 years of sobriety. We have character witnesses. We have Robert Mitchell ready to testify about your character. Helen, look at me. He turned to face me, and I saw the defeat in his eyes. I'm a 70-year-old man with burn scars and a history of alcoholism. Ashley is a pretty young mother claiming she's protecting her children. Who do you think people will believe? The truth? I said. People will believe the truth. But I wasn't as certain as I sounded. The weekend before the hearing was the longest of my life. David's lawyer worked around the clock gathering evidence. Robert offered to testify. James' former AA sponsor, a man named Carl who'd become a good friend over the years, agreed to come. David compiled photo albums and videos showing James with the children, proof of their loving relationship. But none of us could shake the feeling that we were fighting an uphill battle. Sunday night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Emma and Tyler, about how they'd asked to visit us, but Ashley had refused to let them come, about how Emma had started asking David if Grandpa James was sick, like her mother said, about how Tyler had cried because he missed our Sunday afternoon cookie baking sessions. At 2 a.m, I got up and went to James' workshop in the garage. The bookshelf he'd been building was finished now. Beautiful oak with intricate carvings. He told me it was for Emma's room, a place for all her beloved books. The door to the workshop opened and James appeared, looking as sleepless as I felt. I was thinking, he said quietly, maybe I should agree to the psychological evaluation. Maybe I should agree to limited contact with the kids, supervised visits, whatever makes this stop. No, I said, that's exactly what Ashley wants. She wants you to admit you're dangerous even though you're not. She wants you to validate her lies. But if it means David gets his children back, isn't it worth it? I walked over to him, put my hands on either side of his scarred face and made him look at me. James Porter, you are the bravest, kindest, most honorable man I've ever known. You ran into a burning building to save a stranger when you were 15 years old. You fought your way out of addiction and stayed sober for 45 years. You have been an amazing father and an incredible grandfather, and I will not let Ashley's lies make you question any of that. He was crying then, and I held him while he cried for the second time in as many months. This man who rarely showed emotion, who kept his pain private, who carried his scars both visible and invisible with quiet dignity. What if I lose them? He whispered. What if the judge decides I can't see Emma and Tyler? I don't know if I can survive that. You won't lose them, I promised. Even though I wasn't sure I could keep that promise, we're going to fight this and we're going to win. Monday morning arrived too soon. The courthouse was packed with reporters thanks to Robert's press conference. We had to push through a crowd of cameras and microphones just to get inside. The hearing room was smaller than I expected, more intimate. Ashley sat on one side with her lawyer, looking demure and concerned in a navy blue dress with her hair pulled back. She didn't look at us, didn't acknowledge our presence. Emma and Tyler weren't there. David had insisted they not be present, and thankfully the judge had agreed. Ashley's lawyer went first, painting a picture of James as an unstable addict who'd hidden his past and now posed a potential danger to his grandchildren. She brought up the fire, suggesting that anyone who would run into a burning building showed reckless disregard for personal safety that might extend to the children's well-being. I wanted to scream. She was using James' heroism as evidence of mental instability. Then it was our turn. David's lawyer was brilliant. She presented 45 years of sobriety records. Carl testified about James' commitment to recovery, about how he'd sponsored others in AA, about his integrity and dedication. Robert took the stand and told his story again, this time directly to the judge, explaining exactly what kind of man James was. And then David testified. My father has been the best role model I could have asked for, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. He taught me about responsibility, about facing your mistakes, about being honest. Yes, he struggled with addiction when he was younger. And yes, he got help and overcame it. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to be proud of. He looked directly at Ashley. Then my soon-to-be ex-wife is not protecting our children. She's using them as weapons because she's embarrassed by my father's appearance and angry that her manipulation has been exposed. She doesn't get to rewrite history and turn a hero into a villain just to save face. The judge was a woman in her 60s, her expression unreadable. She listened to everything, took notes, and then called for a recess. We waited for 2 hours. 2 hours of sitting in uncomfortable chairs in the courthouse hallway, watching lawyers come and go, wondering if our family was about to be torn apart permanently. Finally, we were called back in. The judge looked at Ashley, then at us, then at the stack of documents in front of her. I've reviewed all the evidence presented today, she began. And I've listened to testimony from both sides. Mrs. Porter, you've painted a picture of Mr. James Porter as a dangerous addict, but the evidence doesn't support that characterization. Ashley's face went white. What the evidence shows is a man who made mistakes in his youth, sought help, and has maintained sobriety for 45 years. It shows a grandfather who has a loving relationship with his grandchildren, supported by photographs, videos, and testimony from multiple witnesses. It shows a hero who saved a life at great personal cost, not a reckless individual. The judge turned to Ashley. What this evidence also shows, Mrs. Porter, is a pattern of manipulation and deception on your part. You kept vital information from your own father for years. You attempted to isolate your husband from his parents, and now you're attempting to use your children as leverage in a custody dispute. Your Honor, I was only trying to protect my children, Ashley protested. No, Mrs. Porter, you were trying to control your husband and punish your in-laws. There's a significant difference. The judge looked back at her papers. I'm denying your emergency custody motion. Mr. James Porter poses no danger to his grandchildren, and there is no basis for restricting his contact with them. In fact, I'm going to recommend that when the final custody arrangement is determined, Mr. Reporter's continued involvement in Emma and Tyler's lives be specifically protected. I grabbed James' hand. David was crying. Ashley looked like she'd been slapped. Ashley looked. Furthermore, the judge continued, I'm troubled by your willingness to publicly smear a family member's reputation for your own benefit. The court takes a dim view of parental alienation, Mrs. Porter. If this pattern continues, it will be taken into account in the final custody determination. We'd won. Against all odds, with everything stacked against us, we'd won. But as we left the courthouse, pushing through the reporters, I saw Ashley's face. And I knew this wasn't over. Not really, because while we'd won the legal battle, the emotional damage had been done. And some wounds don't heal no matter how much time passes. 3 weeks after the hearing, David called with news that made my blood run cold. Mom, Ashley's gone. She took the kids. I nearly dropped the phone. What do you mean gone? I went to pick up Emma and Tyler for my custody time. Ashley's sister's house was empty. Neighbors said they saw them loading up a car 2 days ago. Ashley's not answering her phone. Her lawyer claims she doesn't know where Ashley is. David, that's kidnapping. I know. I've already called the police. They're issuing an Amber Alert. His voice broke. Mom, what if I never see them again? What if she's taken them somewhere I can't find them? James had come into the room when he heard my voice rise. I quickly filled him in. We need to find them, James said immediately. We need to help David find his children. The police are involved now, David said. There's not much we can do except wait. But waiting felt impossible. Emma was 10 years old. Tyler was 7. They had school, friends, a whole life here. Where would Ashley take them? How far would she go? The answer came sooner than we expected. And from a source none of us anticipated. Patricia Mitchell called that afternoon. Her voice was shaking. Helen, I think I know where Ashley is. Where? There's a family property in Montana. It belonged to Robert's parents. A remote cabin in the mountains. Ashley loved it as a child. We used to spend summers there. If she's gone anywhere, it's there. Have you told Robert? I'm about to. But Helen, there's something else you need to know. Something I found in Ashley's old room when I was looking for clues about where she might have gone. I waited, my heart pounding. I found a journal from 2 years ago, right around the time she hired that private investigator to find James. She'd been documenting everything, her plans, her thoughts. Patricia's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Helen, she was planning this from the beginning. The manipulation, the isolation, even the possibility of taking the children and disappearing. It's all in there, written out like a battle plan. Why would she document all of that? I think she thought of it as a project like her genealogy research. She was approaching the destruction of your family like it was a problem to be solved. Patricia was crying now. My daughter is sick, Helen. Not mentally ill but morally sick. And I helped create her by always excusing her behavior. Always defending her, always putting her wants first. Patricia, this isn't your fault, isn't it? Robert tried to teach her values. I taught her that appearances mattered more than character. That being pretty and charming was more important than being kind. I modeled the exact behavior she's now using to destroy people's lives. We got off the phone after she promised to send David the journal and the address of the Montana property. Within an hour, David had contacted the local authorities in Montana, and they'd agreed to send someone to check the cabin. But what they found there changed everything. The cabin was empty, but it showed signs of recent occupation. Food in the refrigerator, beds slept in, children's clothes in the bedroom. Ashley had been there with Emma and Tyler, but they'd left. Left in a hurry, according to the local sheriff, based on the items left behind, and they'd found something else. A note addressed to Robert. You turned everyone against me. You chose a stranger over your own daughter. Now you'll never see your grandchildren again. I hope saving James Porter was worth it. Robert called us that night, his voice broken. She's using Emma and Tyler to punish me because I stood up for James at the press conference because I told the truth. Robert, this isn't your fault, I said, echoing what I told Patricia. Ashley made her choices. But she's my daughter. Somehow Patricia and I failed her. We created someone capable of this level of cruelty. James took the phone from me. Robert, listen to me. I've been thinking a lot about responsibility lately, about how much of Ashley's behavior is about me, about my scars, about the fire. And I've realized something. At some point, we have to stop taking responsibility for other people's choices. Ashley is an adult. She chose to manipulate. She chose to lie. She chose to take those children. That's on her, not on you. It was the most I'd heard James say about the situation since it began. And he was right. We'd all been so busy blaming ourselves, wondering what we could have done differently, that we'd forgotten the simple truth. Ashley was responsible for Ashley's choices. But that didn't help us find Emma and Tyler. 2 days later, we got a call from an unexpected source. A woman named Dr. Sarah Chun, a child psychologist from Seattle. I'm calling about Emma and Tyler Porter, she said. I have them in my office right now. What? How? David was on the phone within seconds of me calling him. Their mother brought them to me yesterday. She wanted me to evaluate them to document their anxiety about seeing their grandfather. But when I started the evaluation, the children told me a very different story. Dr. Chun explained that Emma and Tyler weren't afraid of James at all. They missed him. They'd been confused and upset by their mother's sudden decision to leave Pennsylvania to pull them out of school to tell them they could never see their grandfather again. Emma is 10, old enough to understand more than her mother realized. She told me about the hearing, about how her mother had lied about Grandpa James. She asked if I could help her call her dad. Dr. Chen's voice was warm, so I did. And then I called the police. Dr. Chen explained that Ashley hadn't just fled to Seattle at the last minute. From what the children told me, they'd been here for about 3 weeks. Ashley had rented an apartment, enrolled them in a new school under different names, and was building what she called documentation for an international custody case. She'd been taking them to various doctors and therapists, trying to get someone to confirm that the children were traumatized by their grandfather. 3 weeks, I repeated, understanding dawning. She'd been planning this for weeks before she even left Montana. It appears so. The children said they went to the Montana cabin first, stayed there for a few days while their mother figured things out, then drove to Seattle. Ashley told them it was a vacation, but Emma knew something was wrong when her mother enrolled them in school and told them to use fake names. Ashley had been arrested an hour ago, picked up at a coffee shop while her children were in Dr. Chen's office. She was being charged with custodial interference and kidnapping. She would be extradited back to Pennsylvania to face charges. Emma and Tyler were safe. They were flying home the next day with a social worker. We all went to the airport to meet them. David was shaking, barely holding himself together. When Emma and Tyler came through the gate, both children broke into a run. Tyler made it to David first, throwing himself into his father's arms. But Emma ran past David straight to James. "Grandpa," she sobbed, wrapping her arms around him. "Mom said you were sick. She said you were dangerous, but I knew she was lying. I knew it." James sank to his knees, holding his granddaughter, this brave little girl who'd seen through her mother's manipulation. "I'm okay, sweetheart. I'm okay." Tyler joined them and then David. And I stood watching my family hold each other in the middle of the airport while travelers walked around us, and I cried tears of relief. But even then, even with the children home safe, I knew we weren't done. Because Ashley was facing serious charges, and the trial was going to expose every detail of her manipulation, her deception, her willingness to destroy lives to get what she wanted. The final revelation was still to come, and it would be worse than any of us imagined. The trial started on a humid Tuesday in August, 8 months after that disastrous Christmas dinner. Ashley was facing multiple charges: custodial interference, kidnapping, parental alienation, and several financial crimes related to the money she'd taken from her family's trust. James didn't want to attend. He'd said everything he needed to say, and being in a courtroom with everyone staring at him, dissecting his past, was his version of hell. But Robert had asked him to come, and James couldn't say no to the man whose life he'd saved. The prosecution's case was strong. They had the journal Patricia had found documenting Ashley's plans. They had the emails to the therapist. They had testimony from David, from Emma, from Dr. Chun in Seattle. They had proof of Ashley's 2-year deception about James' identity. But Ashley's defense team had a strategy. They were going to paint her as a protective mother driven to desperate measures by a family that had gaslit her, manipulated her, and turned everyone against her when she tried to protect her children. On the third day of the trial, they called their surprise witness. "Me, Mrs. Porter," Ashley's lawyer began, his voice smooth. "You've been married to James Porter for 45 years. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And during that time, has he always been honest with you?" I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" "I mean, has your husband always told you the truth about his past, about his actions, about his history?" David's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed the question. I had to answer. "My husband and I have been honest with each other about everything that matters." "Everything that matters," the lawyer repeated. Interesting phrasing. "Are you aware, Mrs. Porter, that your husband lied on his hospital admission forms 45 years ago when he was being treated for alcohol poisoning? He was sick and ashamed. Many people in his situation lie. Are you aware that he lied to his employer about the reason for his extended absences during that period? He had an illness. He was protecting his job." The lawyer smiled not pleasantly. "Lying to protect yourself. Lying because you're ashamed. These are understandable. You say, so when my client lied about knowing her father was searching for James Porter, when she lied because she was ashamed of her father-in-law's appearance and protecting her social standing. Why is that different?" "Because her lies hurt people," I said, my voice rising. "Her lies separated a father from his children. Her lies destroyed families. James' lies 45 years ago were about protecting himself when he was at his lowest point. Ashley's lies were about controlling and manipulating everyone around her." Or, the lawyer countered, Ashley's lies were about protecting her family from what she perceived as an unstable influence. He pulled out a document and presented it to the judge. "This is a psychiatric evaluation of James Porter from 46 years ago before he went to rehab. It describes severe depression, anxiety, and what the doctor called unresolved trauma from his burn injuries." James had gone very still beside me. I'd known about the depression, had lived through it with him, but seeing it weaponized like this used to paint him as unstable was unbearable. My client, Ashley's lawyer, continued, was aware of this history. She knew that her father-in-law had struggled not just with alcoholism, but with mental health issues. She made a judgment call about what was best for her children. Was she perfect? No. Did she handle it well? Perhaps not. But was she malicious? Or was she simply a mother trying to protect her family the best way she knew how? It was a brilliant defense. Twisted, dishonest, but brilliant. He was reframing Ashley's cruelty as misguided protection. The prosecution countered with the journal with Ashley's own words planning the elimination of James from David's life. They showed the emails where she'd laughed about manipulating David. They presented testimony from Emma, who bravely told the court how her mother had lied to her, scared her, used her as a weapon against her father and grandfather. But the damage was done. The defense had successfully muddied the waters, making it seem like this was a family dispute gone wrong, rather than deliberate, calculated abuse. And then Robert Mitchell took the stand. He looked older than he had at Christmas, the stress of the past months showing in new lines on his face. But his voice was strong and clear as he told his story once again. The fire, the rescue, the 55 years of searching. My daughter knew how important finding this man was to me. Robert said she knew that every year on the anniversary of the fire, I would spend the day thinking about him, wondering if he was alive, if he was happy, if he knew how much his bravery meant to me. She knew all of this and she kept silent. Ashley's lawyer cross-examined him. Mr. Mitchell, would you say you've been somewhat obsessed with finding the person who saved you? I'd say I've been grateful. Grateful enough to potentially overlook warning signs about Mr. Porter's fitness to be around your grandchildren. There were no warning signs. James Porter is one of the finest men I've ever met. But you didn't meet him until 8 months ago. You knew nothing about him except that he pulled you from a fire 55 years ago. Isn't it possible that your gratitude has blinded you to legitimate concerns? No, Robert said firmly, because I did my research. After I met James, I looked into his life. I spoke with people who know him, worked with him, have been part of his community for decades. Everyone told me the same thing. James Porter is a good man who made mistakes, learned from them, and became better because of them. That's not someone to fear. That's someone to admire. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Witnesses came and went. Evidence was presented. Arguments were made. But through it all, one thing became crystal clear. This was never about protecting children. It was about control. Ashley had wanted to control her image, her husband, her family narrative. When that control was threatened by the truth about James' heroism and her father's gratitude, she'd escalated. She'd lied, manipulated, stolen money, and finally kidnapped her own children in a desperate attempt to maintain control. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Or when they came back, their verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Ashley showed no emotion as the verdict was read. She didn't cry, didn't react, just stared straight ahead like she couldn't believe this was happening to her. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, David was awarded full custody of Emma and Tyler. Ashley would have supervised visitation once she completed her sentence, which her lawyer estimated would be 3 to 5 years. The day of sentencing, I expected Ashley to finally show some remorse, some understanding of what she'd done. Instead, when given the chance to address the court, she stood up and delivered one final act of defiance. I don't regret protecting my children, she said, her voice steady. I don't regret trying to maintain standards and dignity in my family. What I regret is marrying into a family that valued sentiment over sense, that made a hero out of a man with burned scars and an alcohol problem, that turned on me when I dared to speak the truth. She looked directly at James for the first time since the trial began. You should have stayed in that burning building, she said. The world would have been better off. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged her gavel, calling for order. Robert stood up, his face white with shock and grief. David put his head in his hands. But James just looked at Ashley with something like pity. I hope you find peace, he said quietly. I really do. The judge sentenced Ashley to the maximum 7 years in prison. She also permanently restricted Ashley's custody rights. Even after her release, she would only have supervised visitation with Emma and Tyler, pending psychological evaluation and family therapy. As Ashley was led away in handcuffs, she didn't look at any of us. Not her father, not her soon-to-be ex-husband, not her children, who were safely at home with a babysitter. She walked out of the courtroom with her head high, still convinced she'd done nothing wrong. Outside the courthouse, reporters mobbed us again. But this time we were ready. James stood at the microphone. This man who hated attention, who'd spent 55 years trying to hide his scars and his past. He looked directly at the cameras and spoke. 55 years ago, I ran into a burning building because someone needed help. I didn't think about being a hero. I didn't think about the consequences. I just knew someone was in trouble. And I could help. I'd do it again." He paused, emotion thick in his voice. What happened with Ashley was tragic. Not because of the legal consequences she's facing, but because somewhere along the way, she learned to value appearance over character. She learned to see people's outsides rather than their insides. And that's a kind of blindness that destroys lives. He touched his scarred face. Those marks that had caused so much trouble. These scars tell a story. They tell the story of a night when I chose to be brave instead of safe. They tell the story of 55 years of living with the consequences of that choice. And they tell the story of a family that almost fell apart because one person couldn't see past the surface. He looked at Robert. But they also tell the story of a man I saved, who never forgot, who never stopped being grateful. And that matters more than all the rest. Robert stepped forward and embraced James. These two men bound together by fire and time and scars that went deeper than skin. The reporters got their story. But it wasn't the story of family dysfunction or manipulation or legal drama. It was the story of heroism, gratitude, and the price of valuing appearance over substance. 6 months later, we celebrated Christmas at David's house again. But this time it was different. Emma and Tyler helped me make cookies. Robert and Patricia came, bearing gifts and stories. David smiled more than I'd seen him smile in years. And James. James sat at the head of the table, his scarred hands folded, surrounded by people who loved him, not despite those scars, but in part because of them. Because those scars represented who he was at his core. Someone who ran toward danger to help others. Someone who survived, someone who endured. Emma stood up before dinner and raised her juice glass. "I want to make a toast," she said, her 10-year-old voice clear and strong. "To Grandpa James, the bravest man I know." Everyone raised their glasses. Even Tyler, who was 7 and didn't quite understand what was happening, lifted his juice box high. "To Grandpa James," they echoed. And James, my husband, the boy who ran into a fire, the man who overcame addiction, the grandfather who fought for his family, smiled. Really smiled. It had taken 55 years. A daughter-in-law's cruelty, a trial, and almost losing everything. But he'd finally learned what I'd known all along. His scars didn't make him less. They made him more. More brave, more resilient, more worthy of love. And everyone could finally see what I'd seen from the beginning. Not a damaged man with burned scars, but a hero with proof of his courage written on his skin. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. Music,